Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Honorable MEC. My name is Ned Lamine, and I will be a facilitator of, 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 of this webinar about redefining the informal economy beyond COVID pandemic. I want to take this opportunity to welcome everybody, especially Honorable MEC, Ms. Namsatulumube for Edtea, and the heads of departments, Kota and Edtea, and their food soldiers, and our participants that have joined us already, and our fellow presenters. I believe they will give their short bios, who they are, the co-focus in this webinar, as well as their presentation. As we see in the agenda, our presenters, co-presenters include, I know Richard is represented by Joan, and I correctly on Captain Lobby GR, and I'm informed that Anton won't be joining us. I want to take the opportunity to allow our Honorable MEC to do our opening remarks and open and set the scene. Thank you, MEC.
Yes, good afternoon to our facilitator. Good afternoon to my MEC, my leader, my brother there, MEC of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, MEC Hlomuga, who's our host for this afternoon. And thank you very much, MEC, for your time. Indeed, over the past 3 weeks, we have been engaging with various industry players representing different sectors of our economy, with members of the communities, civil society, business people, academics, and we are very inspired by various robust discussions and the energy that has been injected in the discussions that have been going on since the start of these interactions that we have been having. I'm not going to bore you with what has brought us to where we are now, except to thank the members of the public who have been sending through the messages and comments and inputs. And today we are here discussing the matters of very importance, the issues of interest in the informal economy. And we are informed that this economy is about 1.6 billion of the world's second economies in the globe, and it constitutes the biggest numbers of the workers that are also affected by the lockdown around the globe. So you can imagine the kind of the impact then that this COVID-19 is having to the majority of the communities and the business and the entrepreneurs out there in various sectors, in various communities. Here in KwaZulu-Natal, the informal traders, our street traders, our entrepreneurs have really been greatly affected by the lockdown, the anxiety that is out there, the frustration, the red tape that is out there has not made things very easy for our informal traders and our members within the informal economy, as it were. There are a number of categories in the informal sector that have been affected, including sectors such as the mechanics, construction workers, the traditional medicine practitioners, the electricians, the plumbers, the taverns, our operators, koshisanyama betu, both small farmers, both domestic workers, our catering establishment, and a number of other sectors that I can't even begin to calculate. Abalukayo, abayenza various things, abasebenzayo, abazisebenzayo, abazamayo to make a living within the informal sector, and other workers within the creative industry as well, within the tourism industry, who have also been affected, within the transport industry, the taxi industry, and a variety really of other industries as affected by the lockdown of the economy. The informal sector, as we all know, it's a very, very important sector in our economy and in our livelihood, because as we know, many of us bangaga namhlanje because sikhuliswe ngabomama by the families abebezama impilo through the informal sector. So to our panel members who will help us understand what needs to be done, how do we cushion this informal economy, but also some of the negative impact of COVID-19 in the informal economy. I know that Mr. Dobson, who's also one of our panel members today, Ms. Skinner and Babu Ndlovu and other members the subject. We can report that as the department, we've really been trying very hard to communicate with iminyango ehlukahlukene kahulumeni omkhulu kazwelonke, ama-ministers ahlukahlukene weminyango ehlukahlukene ngenhloso yokuthi sizame ukuthi sikhulumisane as to how we can mitigate the risks that are associated with the infections of our communities if the economy was to just open without any precautions of the COVID-19. And I must say that a number of people within all the sectors of the economy are aware of the mitigating factors. And abaningi abantu abasebenza informal sector have always as well been aware of the matters of the occupational health and safety measures, because siyazi ukuthi we always even have inspectors that are always inspecting our businesses. We always have people that are always making sure that even when we operate as food operators, there's always health inspectors that are always inspecting us, whether we are in the construction, whether we're in the food or transport industry. There are always inspectors in all those industries. So most of the abantu abasebenza ku-informal sector, there's always inspections, but also we have got used to a lot of legislation and we have machinery yokukwazi ukubheka izinto ezimelana nokubheka ukuphepha ngendlela esisebenza ngayo within the informal economy. So as the department as well, working with UCOGTA, working with Abomaspala, we have also been trying very hard to support abosomabhizinisi abancane, abalimi abancane kakhulukazi ngesikhathi kuvalwa imboni eziningi kakhulukazi laba abalimayo ukuthatha ukudla siyokudayisa ezitolo, where really we could see that we were hardest hit by the perishables that were getting destroyed through the COVID-19. So we have been working with a number of informal traders for quite a while now as the department in trying to support and assist where we can in trying to deal with the issues that have been impacting in the informal economy. So as we move forward, for us, really, it is not to provide any solution, but is to say that our government has had a number of legislation, has had a number of regulations. What we have done as the department is to try and get all those regulations, all those legislation, and we've tried and make each one of those regulations and legislation ukuthi siwa-translate, siwenze abe simplified, and make them available through our one-stop shop that is hosted through the Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal, but also through our district offices under the Department of Small Businesses, as well as the industry unit, the informal economy unit under Program 2. So our district offices have been also working hard in support of the informal economy in terms of ensuring ukuthi siyakwazi ukuncedakala uku-apply for small business support that is available from the minister, national ministers, and various other support that are available through our national ministers. We've set up our teams that are able to help also amabhizinisi abancane ukuthi bakwazi ukuthi uma befuna uku-apply afone simncede ukuthi iform enjena igcwaliswa kanjani, bagcwalisiswe iform bayithumele, and we are able as well to support them with the facilities so as to make sure that really we give that support that we can give at this particular time. But I think critically for this debate is to allow MEC Hlomuga and is to allow all of you to say how do we ensure that we prepare ourselves to ensure that we bring the wheels of the economy back to rolling as soon as possible, because we cannot afford any more job losses, and we cannot afford any more companies, as we can see how companies are struggling, big and small, and in all the sectors, and it's very, very difficult time for everyone, irrespective of which sector you are at. So this discussion, then I hope it will give us that opportunity, which is sonke contributor towards the economic recovery of KwaZulu-Natal, towards coming up with tangible matters of localization strategy, strategies of smart investments. When we invest smartly where we can have quick returns, because we know that the informal economy is one of those economies that are able to turn around quicker than all other economies combined. So I wish to share those words and welcome everybody once more and hand over to MEC Hlomoga and to you, facilitator. Siyabonga.
Thank you very much, Mr. MEC. You have covered everything you have said this in very well and with precision, I must say. May I allow MEC Mhlonishwa to again give us some words of welcoming? Thank you.
Mr. Dlamini, if you'll carry on, MEC is having connection problems and we'll be bringing him in.
Thank you, Steve. Having IT problems. I guess we can proceed. We recognize his participation. I think we can proceed with our program. If I look at the time, I think each presenter will have about 20 minutes inclusive of presentation and a bit of discussion, because I'll be taking questions. Participants will be writing questions on the side. Following the agenda is Joanne, it's your turn. Can you take us through your presentation, please? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I just need to share screen here. Can you see the screen? Okay, can everybody see that? I can't tell here.
No, we can't see anything as yet.
And now?
Nope.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what's going wrong.
It came and disappeared quickly.
Okay, let me just get back.
Can you share on her behalf, Dennis?
Should be there now.
It's here.
It's there now.
Okay, you can see it.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so I am presenting this presentation on behalf of Edtea Tafaleni. Richard Dobson was meant to do this presentation, which has been prepared by him and by Patrick Ndlovu, who is also on this webinar. So Patrick, I hope you will jump in if there's anything you need to add. It's quite difficult presenting something on someone else's behalf, so I will do my best to convey what the thinking is, and to try and keep to time, which I've got a feeling might be a bit of a challenge. So I'm an architect and urbanist. I've been working very closely with Edtea Tafaleni for the last year, and then on and off have worked in various capacities with them probably over the last almost 20 years now. It's a pity that Richard can't be joining us, but...
Hello.
Okay, so this really is just an outline. So I think just to go back, the focus of this presentation is about informal workers in public space. So we're really talking about street vendors primarily in public spaces. And this slide really just gives an overview of what the presentation includes. So we're going to talk a little bit about the urban configuration, what we call the urban configuration. So what is the space, the regulatory and management implications, a process for trying to put in place some kind of plan. Okay, facilitator, would you like me to stop for the MEC to come in?
Yeah. Thanks, Johan. I think he is on now.
Should I pause or continue? What do you want me to do?
I guess it would be proper if you pause and give MEC a chance a few minutes to welcome us so that we can proceed with after that. MEC Mhlonishwa, you're welcome.
Okay.
Welcome you to joining us. I'm Red Lamini, the facilitator, and because of time, can I please give you a few minutes to welcome us our opening remarks? Thank you. You're on, MEC. We can see. Thank you.
You got some subs in?
MEC Shlomuga, we can hear you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Sis B, please somebody call MEC and let him know that we're online for him, or somebody please.
Okay. Seems like they logged off.
MEC Shlomuga, can we hear us? You're online. Colleagues, I'm tempted to suggest that journalists continue and finish presentation, then we give MEC Shlomuga an opportunity after that. Is that fine with
Yes,
everybody?
I think Mr. Dlamini, let's proceed with the presentation. Maybe we'll come in after that. Thank you.
Thank you. John, the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay. Okay, can you see?
Yep.
Okay, and then towards the end of the presentation, we talk a little bit about some ideas about implementing a strategy. So the first slide, really, we're talking about what we call the ecosystem. So there are a whole lot of things that inform how the informal economy works, and it talks to sort of why traders locate where they do. And really what we're saying here is traders will locate where there is footfall. They will optimize their customer base and they will locate where there is footfall. And in general, that is concentrations of customers are going to be where people assemble. So taxi ranks, the magistrates' courts, schools, hospitals, and obviously on the main routes that link these things together, that's where you're going to find high concentrations of people. And so that is where you're going to find high concentrations of traders. And it's a fairly dynamic response. So some traders will trade at different times of the day. They will even change the goods that they're trading during the course of the day. And that might also change over the course of the week because they're constantly responding to where their customers are. And the big suggestion really that comes out of this for a broader strategy is that it's quite difficult to manage where traders are without thinking of that together with managing what the drivers of where traders want to be are. So for example, as public transport opens up slowly, as lockdown restrictions are reduced, if we start thinking about how taxi ranks are opened up, how the taxi industry is opened up, and if we start to manage how, as ranks are opened up, they kind of spread out, as a consequence of spreading out ranks, we will also be spreading out people trading on the street, wanting to catch the commuters who are their customers. So it's really just a suggestion that the strategies need to be considered together and not in isolation. Some assumptions going forward. The big one is that we cannot address post-lockdown challenges based on the historic spatial configuration and management, and for a number of reasons. And I'm not going to talk to these in any detail because we kind of come back to them during the presentation. But essentially, we're going to have to anticipate a significant increase in the number of traders. There are a lot of people who, through the process of lockdown, will have lost their jobs. So there's going to be a significant increase in people who are going to be looking to the informal economy to generate some kind of livelihood. We should anticipate considerable kind of innovation from the traders' side. They are going to be looking to play catch up. They're going to be looking to try and respond to where they can do business based on where people are, and that's going to be a response to how things open up. And that's going to be a moving target. They're going to be constantly recalibrating where they are, how they're operating. So that's going to be difficult because it's what just adds complexity. And we're anticipating that the reoccupation of the streets is going to be a fundamental challenge to the existing systems. And what we're really saying, I'll talk a bit more to this later, is that these are unusual circumstances that are going to require skillful handling, but we're going to need to introduce some sort of flexibility in how the informal economy is managed for a while, because the old ways where the status quo before lockdown is not really going to be applicable anymore. So to just talk to the numbers, obviously there are existing traders, and there is these numbers are disputed anyway, particularly, I mean, our experiences in eThekwini in particular, but where the number of traders is often in dispute, and it's how do you define informal workers on the street. There's so-called illegal traders, which really just means that it's traders without a permit, legal traders, permitted traders, and what we are definitely going to see is that there are going to be even more people who perhaps were never trading on the street before are going to be looking for income generating opportunities here. And the tension then is going to be that there's going to be more and more demand for people wanting to trade on the street, at the same time as needing to be practicing physical distancing as a health guideline to try and reduce virus transmission. So we've got this kind of tension between needing more space and more people wanting to be on the street. And then here, the implications of physical distancing is exactly that. We're going to need more space, and we specifically want to ask people to sort of think of this in terms of physical distancing as opposed to social distancing, which is a slightly different thing. We are talking about measurable kind of meters and millimeters. It's about how we make space on the street. And then just to raise something that we're anticipating is that because of how fluid the situation is going to be, as the different levels of lockdown are brought in, is we suspect that there's going to be a greater inclination towards what we call itinerant traders. So people who are using some kind of mobile conveyance, a trolley or something like that, to be able to move around and follow potential customers. This slide is a slide of the herb market in Warwick. And the reason we're showing this is really just to show how completely impossible the current space is if we wanted to try and implement physical distancing there. It would be impossible to try and keep a reasonable distance between the traders, the pedestrians passing through, the customers in the current configuration. So if one is serious about about economic recovery and keeping markets like this open, and this one in particular has a economic, it means that in order to make space for this to be functional and comply with the health guidelines, we're going to have to move some people, and we're going to need to look for alternative space for those people to occupy in the meantime. So that's one of the implications, is what do we do when we need to move people around? Planning, this previous planning is going to require review and amendment, and in 3 different ways. So how informal workers are kind of spread around and allocated space. What is the disposition of vending sites? Directives for or guidelines for customers. How do we ensure that there's adequate physical distancing? And for the public who obviously are walking past all the time, how can we avoid the congestion that starts to work against the health guidelines? And we'll address these a little bit more detail in the next slides. So this diagram shows what typically was done historically in Warwick Junction, so the biggest kind of trader hub in the province. And this is how the spaces were marked out for traders over the years, although, and this complies with the recommendations. So you can see the distances there. If it was all set out like this, in fact, it would comply. But over time, this hasn't always been applied. And obviously in different parts of the province, there have been different ways. But we need to get back to some kind of discipline that would comply. These are examples in India where people have marked out spaces. You can see they've made little circles for where the customers must stand. The traders are spaced apart. The queuing is spaced out. And I'm going to come back to this one later, but you can see that it's just the surface is just sort of sand. So people are having to use whitewash or something and kind of make those markings every day. But it's very important so that everybody knows how they should behave in this situation. And then this is obviously in addition to masks, face shields, washing stations, etc., that need to be accommodated. And then for pedestrians, so on the left-hand side, you can see that there's just huge congestion. It would be it's a fairly typical Durban inner city situation, typical of many places, I'm sure. And you can see that it would be very difficult there for people to keep any kind of physical distance. On the right-hand side, that is an example that we think we should go back to and kind of perhaps look at again, is in parts of Yusuf Dadu, so the old Grey Street in Durban, one traffic lane was taken and the sidewalk was considerably widened. And what that's done, at the time it was done to address congestion, but you can see what it's done is created a lot more space, and potentially one could keep these traders trading and allow for adequate distancing with this kind of configuration. So we need to kind of go back to looking at that as a potential solution. For sort of safe public circulation, this is just a picture of Pixley Kusema Street at the moment. And it's in the middle of the day, it's a busy time of day, and you can see that there's quite a lot of capacity in the actual roadway, so very congested sidewalks. And it's really just to show that there is definitely capacity to be reducing that vehicular space, whether permanently or temporarily, as an opportunity for quite a bold response that will allow space for trading and pedestrians. Okay, moving on to management. I think the main point to make here is that it's going to have to be an interdisciplinary scenario. Line function departments are going to have to work together. In Durban, business support unit, for example, would need to work with health, work with enforcement departments, work with procurement. They're going to have to be multidisciplinary task, one or numerous task teams, perhaps under area-based management, to get effective measures in place to allow for street vending to continue in a safe way. And they're going to need to be quite responsive. As lockdown levels change, the situation is going to need to be dynamic. And what Edtea recommends is the plan for the end goal and allow for kind of temporary measures to be put in place as restrictions change. But we're going to need agreed principles and guidelines, which most importantly are going to have to be supported through intensive consultation and social compacts that will allow some flexibility and voluntary compliance rather than sort of strict enforcement and rushing into new regulations where we don't quite know what the situation is going to be going forward. And again, it's about responding, being responsive and being able to be responsive in an extraordinary situation. This really is a continuation of the same point, and it's really about this idea that a lot of the regulations and bylaws for the foreseeable future are going to be rendered inappropriate. So as an example of that, I'm not going to go through the slide point by point, you can read it, but the usual way, the sort of primary mechanism that a lot of municipalities use is a trader is allocated a space for which they need a permit. And there's a painted square or a stall or something that's allocated to them against a permit. Now, if we suddenly have much more demand for street trading space, traders have really been suffering through lockdown. So a lot of them are already saying that they can't afford to pay for permits. We don't have enough space to accommodate everybody. Suddenly that primary instrument doesn't really work anymore. And what we are suggesting is that we need a more developmental than regulatory approach. There needs to be a slightly more magnanimous kind of attitude, and it needs to be driven by the intention to unlock the economy and to appreciate the role that the informal economy plays in providing livelihoods for so many people. So perhaps the permit arrangements need to be reviewed. Perhaps they need to be suspended temporarily and replaced with some other measures. We would suggest that confiscation of goods as a disciplinary measure should probably just be taken off the table altogether for the moment. People are already going to be battling to afford their stock to even start up again. So we really are looking for a more discretionary, a more flexible, a more magnanimous approach. But again, to emphasize, it's going to have to be underpinned by intensive consultation and I suppose a social compact. It's going to need officials and enforcers to reevaluate the way that they work. It's going to require informal workers and informal worker leadership to also come to the party. And if this is going to work, it's going to require a sort of cooperative rather than an enforcement kind of approach. Much of this, I think I've covered. Again, we're talking about sort of change of attitudes. And what we're really saying is we're looking for willing compliance. There's still going to be a need for some regulations and very clear guidelines, but we're hoping not the kind of zero tolerance kind of lockdown type enforcement that we've seen going forward. Okay, this slide, it talks to what might seem like a very obvious solution. So if there are squares painted and we need to space everybody out, perhaps an obvious solution is just to omit every alternate space and then everybody has adequate space. And what we are proposing here is that you can't just do that. We can't just assume that this is a solution. However, and it can't be implemented arbitrarily. However, it might be possible to negotiate solutions that might end up looking a bit like this. So possibly traders will share spaces in shifts. Possibly somebody who loses their normal spot will be allocated a spot somewhere else. But again, this is going to have to be negotiated in order to achieve compliance. Moving into some recommendations for implementation, the proposal here is for a pilot project. And AT, I think in the report that already provides the framing for this task team, AT has kind of suggested that they're available to assist in developing a plan. We have already been working very closely with informal workers around occupational health issues, developing ideas for wash stations, etc. And obviously, different parts of the province are going to require different responses. But Warwick and eThekwini, if we can get something to work there, there's huge opportunity for cross-learning in an area where large numbers of informal workers could start up again quite soon and be testing some of the ideas that are going to be developed as part of this plan. And just a point about the wash stations, it's not specifically to do with the slide, but there's quite a lot coming out of sort of refugee center precedent or whatever, the idea that things like wash stations can play a dual role. So those can become sites for education. And perhaps when people come to use the wash station, there might be a community health worker there who can be taking temperatures, asking people about their symptoms, disseminating information, etc. So we have quite a lot of ideas about what the kinds of things one might be able to pilot. And then to go back to that slide that I said, where I showed you that in India, where people had sort of marked out where the customer stands, where the queuing happens, where the trader is. There are a lot of places where people are trading where there is no decent hard standing in the public space. And so this proposal is that there's a very specific early project, short-term project that is really about paving those public spaces. It allows for, and I'm just going to go to the next slide, it allows for what we call a kind of an entry-level, minimal infrastructure opportunity for people. All they really need is a decent bit of level pavement. And fold up infrastructure that can then be put away. We can mark that up easily. You can indicate where people should be. It allows for overnight cleaning. If everything is cleared away at night, cleaning and sanitizing can easily happen. And that paving obviously provides an opportunity for various kind of civil works contracts. So perhaps a boost in the construction industry at the same time. But it needs to be done to a high quality. This is it's a short-term intervention, but with long-term impact on the quality of our public spaces. The quality of the surface is important. The quality of getting drainage right is important. But we think that that's a fairly critical initial intervention that would enable a whole lot of other things to happen going forward. And could possibly be managed by a sort of interdisciplinary team. Those are the main things. I think just to go to this one again, I think that's the last slide. And it's really about opportunities to be able to do this even by temporarily closing streets, for example, that aren't that busy yet. Widening sidewalks, etc., etc. It would be very easy to be able to do this and to start accommodating traders. So if there's enough footfall, enough customers to support additional traders and to support the demand for opportunities, this would be a very simple way of starting to achieve that. That's the end of it, and I think I've probably used all of my time. We focused the presentation very much on framing the challenges and trying to kind of get across the complexities of what we're going to have to include in the strategy. There's some preliminary suggestions here, but we're really hoping that in the discussion time, more solutions will come to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan, for your presentation. I guess questions will be coming throughout our question and answer pane, so that we may later respond. As I promised before, I want to honor my promise and give Umhlonishwa MEC Hlomoga a chance to hear us. MEC Hlomoga, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, Nge.
Hi
Mr.
again,
Dlamini.
again. Yes.
I don't think he's still on. It looks like he's switched off now. Let's proceed with all the presentations. If he comes in as we go along, we'll let him speak. But let's proceed with the other presentations for now until we can
Yes.
locate him.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's proceed to Caroline Skinner to do your presentation. And we are tight with time, probably have observed. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Warm greetings, everybody, and thanks so much for this opportunity to present to such an important audience. Nomse, MEC Dube, I really felt that you introduced everything sufficiently well. I'm not sure I need to do this presentation. So I really am reinforcing many of the points that you raised in the introduction. Just to say where I sit, so I'm based at the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town, but my heart is still in KZN, where I spent many, many years doing work on the informal economy. And I work with an international network called WeGo. They weren't mentioning because we have activities in 65 different countries, but we're also monitoring very closely not only the impact on informal workers of the COVID crisis, but also innovative responses. So I just wanted to kind of direct people to our website if they want to see who's doing what internationally. So I had been asked, it's a slightly different register from Joe's. I'm going to kind of stand above what's happening in one city and kind of just reflect on what's happening in the informal economy, somewhat globally, but particularly in South Africa. And I've been asked particularly to pick up on the quarterly labor force survey statistics for the province. So really just to give you a sense of size and shape, and I think this is a very good place to start when thinking through interventions. So as MEC Dube pointed out, globally 61% of all workers are informally employed. So it's actually the dominant form of employment. In South Africa, we have a relatively small informal economy in comparison to many developing countries, but it's still 5 million people. And I think what's interesting is how, particularly negatively impacted this group of people have been in this COVID environment. So it's about 30% of our labor force, and this is made up of 3 million people working in informal enterprises. And I'll come to the kind of fine grain of where those people sit, but also 2 million precarious workers. So they're people who have no written contract, no paid leave, nor medical aid. And as was outlined in the introduction, domestic workers, we have about 1.2 million domestic workers. But the informal sector does contribute significantly to GDP, even though individual incomes are often low. So Stats SA reckons on around about 6% of GDP. And it's highly effective in reducing poverty. So we've done quite, technical analyses, economic regressions to look at this really, and it comes out unequivocal that the informal economy is critical. Obviously, lots of dependents living in low-income settlements with high multiplier effects. So it's a very good area to intervene. I looked at the quarterly labor, the most recent figures for KZN, and the most recent ones are from the last quarter. They're obviously going to look very different, in the COVID environment. But we had about 466,000 people who reported as working in the informal sector, so in enterprises in KZN. So that was about 17% of the total labor force. And there was another group, in addition, 212,000 who reported working in private households. And then I just cited the eThekwini figures. So the quarterly labor force survey is a good place to look around size and shape. Lockdown, we all know this. In terms of lockdown impacts, it has been utterly devastating. And this was a picture that Patrick and Glovo took of Warwick, just to give you a sense of it. This empty environment where we know that there were up to 6,000 vendors operating there. All but a tiny minority have been able to earn any income, and they've used their last savings to feed their families and are now largely dependent on food parcels. So there is, in this particular element of the labor market, there's no social security to fall back on. So for example, only 20% of domestic workers are registered for UIF, and few, if any, informal sector employees are registered. So I was asked to particularly quickly to pick up on the social protection package. So you all will have registered the changes on the 21st of April, where there was this increase in the child support grant. And the details are on the slide, but also this introduction of a COVID-19 social relief of distress grant of 350 rands. And that is spaced over over a good few months. So what does this 350 Rand buy, particularly, or this 300 to 500 amount buy? And I thought this was just important to reinforce that the monthly cost to secure a basic nutritious diet for a child is 670. And this is monitored very closely by a crowd based in close north of Durban, and they looked at the household food basket. So thinking of a household of around about 4 people, and they reckon for April that it's 3,474 Rand. Just to note, as you've probably picked up in the press, there's been quite a radical increase in food inflation. So in the period of 2 months, there's been a 7.8% increase. So there's real kind of concerns there. And the Stats SA food poverty line is around set at 581. So these grants will contribute. They're not even going to, they will just contribute to food, but not to cover any other costs. I think having monitored the informal economy for many years, I think it's important to say that this is a really important start for establishing social protection systems for the informal economy. So it's not to undermine this really important development. And the e-voucher system, if implemented well, and we know there's advances made to be able to use e-vouchers in the informal economy, could have long-term positive implications for those working in the informal sector. We know how prevalent, for example, e-banking is across the continent, and we are somewhat behind. So there are some interesting developmental opportunities that are presenting themselves. However, for today's discussion, informal sector operators will need assistance to start again. So we're hearing from all the networks of informal workers that they really have used their last resources to survive over this period. Just to note, I mean, the SMME support programs that the Department of Small Business Development has pulled together do require CIPC registration. So by definition, the 3 million informal sector operators in the country will not qualify. And we need to kind of, and I mean, so many of you guys are much more in these networks, but if there is opportunity to push back, to get startup funds that can be extended to the small players. And, I think province has so much kind of ability to navigate, interdepartmentally, and perhaps could consider supplementing. Just a few words on other urgent interventions. There's a lot of focus on trade, always, when you talk about the informal economy. And I just wanted to note, I mean, there is something quite interesting about looking at the national statistics. I have no reason to believe that KZN statistics wouldn't be radically different from this. And what they suggest is only 4 in every 10 people working in informal enterprises is actually in trade. And that's not just public space traders, but also traders in township areas, the spaza shops, etc. So we mustn't forget about the myriad of other activities. And maybe a good place to start is to mine the data that we have. The quarterly labor force survey is very solid. It's got big sample sizes. And to look for KZN specifically, it would be a very easy exercise to say what is the size and shape. And it kind of gives you some indication of where we locate our efforts. So that we don't forget the services. I mean, educare is a huge factor. It's and there are other departments involved, the taxi industry, kind of small scale manufacturing. So then just very quickly, other urgent issues, and it very much speaks to this tension of like needing to adhere to the health guidelines. So one of the things would be to think through health guidelines by sector and generate these, translate them and disseminate them. And I'll give you a nice example of some work we've been doing, particularly for traders. water points are critical in informal settlements, but also public spaces. There's obviously the sanitizers and masks, the personal protective equipment, but also this issue of do no harm measures. So stopping the evictions and those clear directives to the police and army. So, we're monitoring very closely what's happening, across the country. And there have been, many cases of confiscation of food vendors' goods. We know, according to the April 2 regulations, that food vendors are allowed to operate. So there's some kind of real issues and urgent issues around, making the current regulations clear. I'm not going to go into any of this detail, but it was just the public health folk have been super helpful, and Rajan Naidu from UKZN Public Health helped us pull these together. It would be quite easy to do these for other sectors. So it's just an example of the kinds of things, practical solutions we can start to think through. And then just finally, to really reinforce the broader point about considering each segment of the informal economy, identifying blockages, but also opportunities. So to give 2 examples, the informal food system, there's very solid research that shows how important informal producers and distributors are to food security, and particularly to food security of poorer households. So the poorer the household, the more likely they are to source their food in the informal economy, and the importance of unlocking the whole system. So simplified licensing, opening the secondary markets. So, in Durban, we know that the Clearwood bulk market is open, but some of the secondary markets aren't. And that's causing supply issues for the smaller players, but also identifying land for food markets in townships. And, we have some open spaces now, if it's school fields or parking lots. And maybe we should start to use those. Another example would be informal clothing. So manufacturing and distribution of face masks and winter clothing under stage 4 lockdown measures is now an opportunity. So we should ensure that there are no blockages in the value chain. So, for example, fabric shops need to be opened, but also that traders distributing these goods have appropriate space to trade. I think that's it from me. Stop my sharing. Yeah, and thanks again for this opportunity. There's lots of content that I didn't have a chance to go through, but hopefully we can engage further.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think we did it within given minutes. That was quick. Thanks very much. And I can see some themes that we have emphasized, that was also emphasized by the MEC, but I won't go to that. I guess now I want to give the opportunities to Pat. Are you there, Pat?
Yes, I am. Let me just share my screen now. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yep. Yes, Pat is on. Thank you.
Okay. So, oops, it's moving by itself. Okay. So basically, I'm the co-convener of the work stream. Thank you very much to the 2 MECs who've hosted this webinar, for giving us this opportunity for maybe getting some issues out there for discussion. I think that it's an excellent opportunity for putting out these issues for discussion. And I know time is going to be short, but I seriously hope that even after this afternoon session, we'll be able to continue with some of the discussions. So I'm just going to go straight into it and try to also keep to the time frame. So the members of the work stream, just for your information, myself and Patrick and Ndlovu are the co-conveners. And then Caroline Skinner, who's just presented, is a member. So is Richard Dobson, whose presentation we heard earlier, and Desmond Desar from the Durban South Community Environmental Alliance. And then we're working together with officials from the Department of Economic Development, Dumisani Kamzila and Sanele Ngubane, as well as from COGTA, KZN, and Tombifuti Buthelezi, the person who's in charge of managing and coordinating the municipalities, Barbara Nguchini and Lisa Del Grande. Now, the main issue which it needs to be stressed, and fortunately, the MEC did this as well as in the presentations. Informal economy is in different sectors, so we can't adopt a one-size-fits-all approach towards it, because there are different conditions in different kinds of informal work, as you've been hearing. So, as you've seen, we talk about informal traders. That also includes a number of different things: street traders, market traders, spaza shops, and informal cross-border traders when you come to our border areas. And then waste pickers, those that are including collection of waste in the streets, and then those who collect on landfill sites and recyclers. Taxi workers, here we're not talking about the owners of the taxis, we're talking about the drivers, conductors, and washers. Then, but of course, their employers, which are the taxi associations, are the informal employers. So they're also affected as employers, not as workers. And the industry has been affected, as we've seen. Home-based workers, that includes care workers and community health workers, then domestic workers, industrial producers, and subsistence fisher people. Now, I wanted to start with what, since the beginning of the lockdown, have people been saying in the sector, which is the informal economy? So collectively, everybody's been calling on government to make urgent arrangements to redirect funds and establish a living cash grant to all informal workers, regardless of nationality, because most people lost their work when the lockdown first started. And people were being asked to self-isolate, which was extremely unfeasible in certain areas. So for people to be able to self-isolate, which most people wished to do for health reasons, but without losing their livelihoods at the same time, there would be the need of a living cash grant. So this call took a long time to show results. And after 4 weeks, there was this announcement of the special grant, which Caroline's talked about, of 350 Rand a month. It's not much, it's a small contribution. But then, even at that stage, when we were in complete level 5 lockdown, we were saying that where there is the opportunity to return to earning their livelihoods, as for example, we managed to get permission throughout the country for informal food vendors, both in spaza shops and street vendors, to go back to work. Uncooked food, this was. So they were among the first lots that were able to go back to work. Under level 4, there are more people who've been allowed to go back to work. But then there's the need for the following urgent interventions, which is the mass provision of protective masks and gloves to informal workers, especially those handling cash, and especially those working with members of the public, organic and waste materials. So these need to be provided. Plus the mass provision of water, soap, and sanitizers in public spaces. What you see in these slides is what's been happening in Sierra Leone. Interestingly, there's a very high level of compliance with these provisions in Sierra Leone, bearing in mind that that's one of the countries that has already been through Ebola. This is not the first pandemic they are experiencing. And they were extremely quick in putting up wash stations, which we were not so quick at doing. And what you see there is them doing this at a popular level with popular buy-in. And what's been interesting, for us in looking at what's happening in Sierra Leone is the high level of popular buy-in and the much lower level of, hardline policing because of the popular buy-in. Obviously, the population there is more compliant than our population because this is the second time they're having the experience. But we obviously have to start somewhere. Then, there's always, out of every crisis, there's a silver lining. As people always tell you, it's always irritating when you're experiencing the crisis, but it's true in this case too. And in fact, it's been mentioned already by the MEC. One of the emerging opportunities is that economic activity in the informal economy can always start up more quickly with smaller capital inputs, not zero capital inputs as I handed out, people have used saving, but start faster than large formal businesses which have collapsed. So this is an opportunity when we look at this issue. Then, in order to, there was already a process ongoing before COVID even came here to ensure a transition from the informal to the formal economy in a rights-based way, ensuring decent work. It seems that now is the opportunity to fast-track that transition in the process of our post-lockdown economic recovery. In line with the guiding principles of the ILO recommendation, we can share that recommendation with you. It's a very good participatory consensual document which was adopted in 2015 in the ILO conference by governments around the world, as well as businesses and labor. So this is an opportunity, but if we fail to fast track this formalization, this could actually result in increasing informalization, with workers and economic units in the informal economy being relegated to the permanent role of grant recipients. And that's not working very well, because this grant isn't working that well, actually, for those who need it. So the other opportunity, again, which has also been mentioned, is to get the cooperation of representative organizations of workers and economic units in each sector of the informal economy. We have street vendors organizations, taxi drivers unions, home-based workers organizations, community health workers organizations, fisher peoples organizations. Those are the organizations that we need to use to obtain the buy-in and cooperation in encouraging their members to comply with provisions of the prevailing level of lockdown as we go through the different levels. And also informing our members of the changes as and when they take place, so assisting with the implementation of the risk-adjusted strategy. And then at the same time, sensitizing people with regard to social distancing, physical distancing. To be honest, Joe, I wasn't aware there was a difference, so I've learned something today. Sanitizing, etc., in public space as lockdown restrictions are progressively relaxed in accordance with the 5-level risk-adjusted strategy. Well, you've already seen this kind of picture in the first input. We've seen this kind of thing happening in a number of African countries since we saw these pictures from India, Tanzania, Uganda, Ghana. Most countries in Africa who are having to relinquish some of their lockdown provisions are adopting these kind of spacing arrangements to help people get back to work in a healthy way. And then the issue of capitalize on the opportunities that I've mentioned. It's really important that the approach has to be transparent, simple, universal. It's extremely difficult for people to be told that they can get something, but then the requirements make it impossible to access. As we've heard before, this requirement, for example, from the Small Business Development Department of CIPC registration, it's not workable. It's got to be inclusive, and it's also got to be non-discriminatory. This is sometimes a hot potato when it comes to non-South Africans. In the current situation, irrespective of what the long-term immigration policy is, everybody who's here is here, and it's not helpful for any of them to be starving. It's therefore not helpful to discriminate against people that are starving when there are food relief measures or cash vouchers or whatever. So this needs to be consistently conveyed to all municipalities by Edtea, COGTA, and SALGA. We do find some unevenness in implementation when it comes to municipalities, and this is why the linking role that COGTA plays is extremely important. And at national level, it's been helping us to be able to try to get through more easily to all the municipalities around the country. So as I've mentioned also, our approach does need to be sector-based, but I think with all the inputs I've heard, I'm fairly sure that's what we are working towards anyway. We're not talking about a one-size-fits-all policy. So then what is the role of government? Well, immediate government interventions are obviously needed to ensure that informal work startups are not frustrated by bureaucratic red tape and forced to operate clandestinely or even close down. That's really counterproductive. It's not usually government's intention to make that happen, but sometimes the kind of red tape, forces that to happen. It's an unintended consequence in most cases. Then with monitoring and following the implementation of health measures for getting informal workers back to work safely, keeping them safe in their workspaces as part of the graduated process of getting the economy working again. This is very important, and it involves a lot of sensitizing as we go along, especially now that we've hit level 4, and many informal workers have been able to go back to work, but the conditions are not yet optimum. For example, many new informal workers who are not trading in food are now able to work. Waste pickers are now able to work, and many other categories. So it's extremely important that we now focus on what happens in those workspaces. And then we need to prepare a just framework for and managing the reoccupation of public spaces during the remaining phases of lockdown. So we have to give a lot of attention to public space management, and the first presentation addressed this in quite a bit of detail. Another key issue for government, please, is the training of provincial enforcement agents, as well as the South African Police and the South African National Defence Force, so that we don't have mixed messages coming through. It's extremely important that the SAPS and SANDF are properly briefed, work together with representatives of worker organizations, small business organizations, trade unions, etc., on the implementation of the approach that's going to be adopted by this work stream, as we see the gentleman here in India keeping an eye on what's been agreed in that situation, in that particular state. So just to talk very briefly of how this links in with national level strategy, I've mentioned before that we are using at national level the paradigm of the ILO recommendation 204 on the transition from the informal to the formal economy. It's a transition strategy which is rights-based. It's not the sort of unilateral kind of formalization measures that we used to see a lot before. And we need to sustain that rights base to have a just way of moving into the economy again. President Ramaphosa met with NEDLAC Exco, and where I've been representing the community constituency, and raised the issue of the need for the new social contract. So in the first presentation, we heard about local level social contracts, where we get the buy-in of people at local level in that. But in fact, the president has raised this at national level as well, and this is likely to be continuing. And the voice of the informal economy is very much in those discussions through the community constituency, where we are making sure that when we talk about workers now, we talk about people in the informal economy as well. When we talk about business, we talk about the informal economy businesses also. Just to briefly look at what's been happening at international level, I think we've been learning a lot. I've already mentioned the Sierra Leonean example, which is extremely educative for us because it's people who've been through this kind of thing before. Very few people on this planet have been through that before, other than those 3 or 4 countries in West Africa and Central Africa that have had Ebola. So WeGo, which Caroline mentioned, and StreetNet, which I come from, have been interacting virtually with workers in the informal economy around the world. And we started to observe that African countries have reacted differently after we all observed the initial breakout in China, Asia, and then in Europe. Some countries like Kenya started emulating European-style lockdowns at a very early stage, but it's been really difficult to sustain this. Rwanda did the same, and nobody was allowed to work, so they started out handing out food parcels door to door to relieve the distress caused by people not being able to work. But now they're facing problems with being able to sustain that, because all of these lockdowns are turning out to need to be extended. Tanzania, controversially, took a deliberate decision not to do a lockdown because President Magufuli said he can't sentence his population to starvation. So they instead immediately instituted a program of regulating markets and public spaces by rearranging them for social distancing, setting up wash stations and educating informal workers about the health issues. To be honest, that's where most of us are now, having been through certain levels of lockdown. So maybe President Magufuli knew something the rest of us didn't know at that time. In Malawi, the government was about to impose a lockdown, but civil society got organized and actually succeeded in getting a court injunction, stopping the government from going ahead with it. And if you look at the figures, not having a lockdown hasn't meant that the numbers have surged upwards in Malawi or Tanzania for that matter, where their figures are higher than Uganda, but they're lower than Kenya. So I think most countries in Africa are in a similar position to us now. The situation of getting the economies back to work, but trying to pay attention to the health issues. Sierra Leone, I've talked to you about. The Sierra Leone Traders Union, it's a very proactive organization of workers in the informal economy, what they call petty traders there. They started by educating their members, teaching them how to set up wash stations, which I showed you in an earlier picture. They ran pushback programs for social distancing in public spaces, which we heard about in the first presentation. And they started to gain the buy-in of informal traders on the ground even before there was one single case in the country. They were really early. So their numbers remain, far below what we have in South Africa. Of course, there's many reasons for that, but nevertheless, they were really early. Before there was even, they have had a lockdown. It's had different conditions from ours, but they started this long before the lockdown. So when the situation worsened and there was the lockdown, the government actually managed to arrive at the conditions of the lockdown in negotiation with this union and the informal transport unions. It was very interesting. So as a result, despite the hardship they suffer in Sierra Leone, because they have less resources than our government, they haven't been able to have an income grant or even think of it. But there's a high level of compliance from ordinary people, and it hasn't been necessary to rely much on police or army. Well, this just shows you the office of one of those organizations to show you that we're not talking about a smart or a posh organization with lots of resources. We're talking about a people-centered organization which has these kinds of offices in most of the states in Sierra Leone. In Burkina Faso, all the markets were closed. But soon after that, the government noticed that they couldn't contain the distress and the starvation of the people. So they did what our government did. They allowed informal fruit and vegetable vendors and wholesalers to go back to work, but under more regulated conditions. I know what you're seeing here doesn't look that regulated, but if you'd been to this place before COVID, you would have seen the difference. I've been there before. Probably from South Africa, you think it looks very crowded. But comparatively speaking, I can promise you that it isn't. In Senegal, there had been a national dialogue initiated by President Macky Sall in December 2019. At the time, it was for the purposes of getting different sectors of society committed to a process of national economic development, something like what President Kagame has been doing in Rwanda. But this process was interrupted. But they've got a High Council of Social Dialogue. It's like our NEDLAC in South Africa. And that High Council is now involved in a dialogue with workers in the informal economy and their representatives about how to manage the situation. And they've also repurposed to look at post-corona economic recovery. So it's clear that the African countries are different from Europe in that they have much larger informal economies, much less social protection. So they can't sustain European-style lockdowns for as long as even struggling European countries can. So despite all the different approaches, as I've mentioned before, all are gravitating to what we also have now in South Africa. In other words, gradual re-entry into economic activities with the introduction of health measures such as wash stations and managed use of public space. So it seems that almost universally, COVID-19 has ushered in a greater consciousness and awareness about the informal economy than we used to see before from government and the formal sector. This is another important opportunity. We never used to hear the president talk about the informal economy in any of his sonas, but I can't remember a speech that he's made since the beginning of the lockdown where he hasn't mentioned the informal economy. And that's applied to the Minister of COGTA, the Minister of DTI, and most of the others. So I think this is really the opportunity for us who work with the informal economy to make sure that in the recovery period, the workers in the informal economy really are in the center. So thank you very much. And this was one of the other forgotten sectors, the street, the beach artists, the sand, and they did a sand sculpture about the virus, which I thought was, which I captured actually just before the lockdown when we were still allowed to work on the beachfront. So already the sand sculptors were ready about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pat, for your presentation. I'm seeing a lot of questions starting to come out, but we'll come to them after all presenters have made their presentation. Jenny, Patrick, are you ready? Patrick?
Yes. I think if I do give a presentation, it will be almost similar to what my other presenters have presented, before me. I think we should utilize this time maybe for questions and answers.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks, Kajeni. Probably our last presenter, GL Cock. Are you there? Is the GL Cock? Oh. It looks like we don't have our presenter GL Cock, and I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing him in our list. Probably now it's time to get to our question. I have in the. I think we have about 15 questions. I wonder whether our panelists see those questions. Can I get a yes or no?
I looked at the questions just before I started speaking, so I must quickly look at that question and answer now and look at those that came in while I was busy.
You can go ahead.
Okay, I haven't looked at them yet.
We don't have much, some are comments, but we have about 5 or 6 questions.
So just to comment on one that was directed me, if that's okay, through you, Chair.
Right, go ahead.
There was an important point about informal fisherfolk. I mean, they provide incredibly important protein, so and haven't been declared essential service workers. And certainly we're hearing that, they're experiencing high levels of harassment. So again, there's some interesting kind of regulatory issues we need to look at. So both changing those regulations, because that food is, really critical and it's critical for livelihoods, but also, matched up with the need for clear communications to security personnel. It's a very different form of policing that we're needing at the moment. So not kind of heavy-handed. So that was really just looking through the questions. That was the one point directed at me.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone from presenters to respond to 1 or 2 questions? I can see one question is coming from municipality where they should allow people without permits to trade.
Maybe I can come in on that one. I think what we need to look at is changing the approach towards regulation. It's important to have some level of regulation, but some of the regulations, what we noticed, if I can, we learned a few lessons after the 2nd of April when nationally informal food vendors were allowed to trade. And the Minister of Cooperative Governance, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, sent forward a directive to all the municipalities, which was extremely helpful because what it directed the municipalities to do was to make sure that people were issued with the temporary permits that they needed for that, without imposing impossible or difficult to meet requirements, and even gave them a template to use if they didn't have an already workable system or if their existing system wasn't sufficient. And that was quite effective because what we saw was many people getting permits who hadn't had permits before. Those who'd had permits before were able to continue to trade with them. But permits were issued more freely in recognition of the urgent crisis situation it was trying to address. And I think that there's a lot of unevenness in the permit systems in the different municipalities. So I think that every municipality has to decide, what works for them. And what we've seen with level 4, some municipalities have very seamlessly moved into a situation of allowing people to trade, creating different kinds of permits that are not difficult to get. I think that it should be possible that everybody who wishes to have a permit should be able to get it. Having a permit is helpful because then that allows the authority to have a database of who is trading. If the requirements are too difficult, then you have something like 20% of your traders trading with permits, the other 80% without the permits. You send the police after them. It doesn't stop them doing the work because there's a reason why they have to do it. So I think a review of permits systems would be helpful in this phase, and probably something which should be able to last afterwards. When we started this work, we got a sort of a position paper from the two departments that started this work stream, suggesting that we should read the removal of red tape, the setting up of one-stop shops, which some of the questions that have come up are talking about the fact that one-stop shops are not working. Yes, informal traders are painfully aware of that. I haven't seen one yet in South Africa that works. So I think we have to go back to the drawing board on those kinds of things so that people can, not to abandon the issuing of permits, because I think it makes it hard for the municipality to do regulation, but to review the permit systems. That would be my suggestion to municipalities.
Yes, if I may come in as well through you, facilitator. This is
go ahead.
Yes. So we all know that COVID-19 has aggravated on the already existing challenges that are currently facing or affecting informal workers. And we know that there will be a lot of...
Apologies for this. We're not seeing you. I think your glasses. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. We are only seeing your forehead only.
Oh, okay. I'm more like an ancestor. You need to use the imperfect to see me. I'm joking. I'm saying COVID-19 has aggravated, on the already existing challenges facing informal traders, in South Africa as a whole. So we all have to work towards a new normal. So things won't be the same. So talking about permits and, and people that haven't got permits, we have to look at a process. How are we going to deal, with that problem? So we need a process and the project, then policy, of enforcement, later at a later stage. So currently we are facing hunger, poverty. So the poverty and hunger doesn't ask whether you have a permit or you don't have. So we all have to think, use our, think tank to how are we going to face the problem going forward. Because if we believe or rely on enforcement, if we say people should have permits to trade, so how are we going to get rid of people that are not permitted? Are we going to lock them up in prisons? So definitely, this is the time for all of us to come together and come up with a process and a solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gajen. Remember the do not harm measures have been again raised in this discussion. Colleagues, does anyone have any responses to any of these questions? I see a question around about smart investment, what can be made so that things can be done differently. Anyone?
So I was going to come in actually on free Wi-Fi. So that is one of the smart investments. I mean, we have some of the most expensive data in the whole world, and I think it really has set our informal economy back. One of the countries that we do quite a lot of work in is India, and it's amazing how cheap data has really unlocked lots of opportunities in the informal economy, particularly for young. So it's just something to, I mean, the digital divide, like many kind of inequalities, have really come to the fore in the COVID crisis. And one of the issues to really pick up on is this issue of how expensive our data is, and perhaps looking at free data or bundles of data. I'd also just wanted to quickly pick up on, I think, a dimension that is very important that one of the participants noted is the gender implications. So I think in this next, in this set of interventions, we need to be very aware of the gendered nature of the informal economy, where and the fact that it's a very important source of employment for women, and women have already had that unequal burdens, but that's been exacerbated with the closure of schools. So in terms of disseminating opportunities, just to really be mindful at every step that women are of critical importance. And that, again, all the data, all the research suggests that money and that does tend to be spent on food and education and important things that have important developmental outcomes. Just to pick up on that comment.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just looking at time, but I still can give somebody to talk on partnerships. There's a question around possibility of elevating partnerships. Please talk to that.
Okay, maybe I can talk to that, because I've just been talking this morning to the CEO of the Durban Chamber of Commerce, who made some extremely interesting firstly, she told me what I didn't know, because I don't come from the business sector, but that the Durban Chamber of Business some months ago decided that they should stop only representing big business, and they should be representing, informal, the informal economy as well, which is quite interesting. And their particular interest is to play a role, because she said that their role is to make policy interventions and also networking and linkages. And they've got some capacity, both in the way of retired business people that they call the grey berets, which is quite an interesting idea, business people, as well as some of their own staff who are in a position to do mentoring with people in the informal, to basically help them to adjust the businesses that they are in at the moment in order to be able to part for markets with big businesses. Because at the moment you find often people in the informal economy work in a particular way, and there's a gap between themselves and the big businesses, whereas sometimes they could actually produce goods for the big businesses and so on. So it's something that I think we should pursue, because that network, there's certain workers in the informal economy, particularly people like home-based workers. Home-based workers are all ready to risk masks. The issue is the market and how to find the market. That's one of the areas of lack of experience. And some sort of an interaction with the business sector to partner them up with either one of the grey berets or their own staff who can link them up, for example, with the garment and textile industry, so that they can insert themselves into the value chain. That's something that we should pursue, and I think that would be a smart intervention. I just wanted to make a very quick response to the person who pursued the issue about the permits. I actually thank you for your question. It's a nice question, because I think we need, your question showed me how we've got to think about things differently. The question is, wouldn't a free permit for everybody who needs them defeat the purpose of a lockdown? Now, the issue is that the lockdown is not there to, the lockdown is there to stop infections. So basically, giving people permits in a situation and also managing the space, that would be a way of allowing people to make livelihoods, because the lockdown was not intended to stop people from having livelihoods, but that's what it actually did. So obviously the purpose of the lockdown isn't to stop people from working. So the issue is refusing to give people permits is a way of stopping them from working. And that's not working economically, and we won't be able to sustain that, particularly as it's going into a recession. So one has to find a way to balance what sometimes seems to be contradictory elements of managing health provisions in public spaces. That's why I've talked about the need to manage public spaces as the key issue. And I don't think permits should be the way that's used to do it, because that ends up just simply denying people their livelihoods. So I think we should separate the issue of the permits and the regulation from the issue of management of public spaces. I think it would be good if we could adopt an approach on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I come in and just add to that comment, please? This issue of permits and public space, I was part of the professional team that prepared the now adopted plan for Durban's inner city, and it was a question that came up over and over again, because in Durban, probably about 50% of your regular street vendors, regular informal workers have permits, and about 50% do not. And there's quite a lot of existing tension on the ground already between those two groups. And for officials who are needing to manage public space, manage the informal economy, this creates a bit of an issue for them because they focus their energy on enforcement of what they call illegal traders, but it doesn't mean that those traders go away. So the people are there. There's often an argument that there isn't space for all of them, but actually they are all there. And one of the strategies that we proposed in that plan, and it was part of the presentation that I made earlier as well, is that in fact, there are some design solutions to fitting more people into public space. And that's one of the things that we're calling for now. Here's an opportunity. There's going to be even more demand for trading opportunities. And we need to be rethinking how we design and manage our public space. And we are absolutely convinced, and certainly there was provision in that plan as well for how one might start to implement some changes that would make more urban space available, so that that kind of congestion and the tension on the ground around there not being enough space can be addressed through making more space as opposed to limiting permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Just want now to hand over to the MEC Mhlonisha for closing remarks. But before I do that, there is another question that is addressed to any panelist around stockpiles and savings room, whether they can be upgraded to first state startup capital, because that was again raised in the discussion. Can anyone hit on that one?
I'm happy to take it if others are hesitant, or just have a first shot. I just want us to be very aware of the fact that stockpiles have probably been drawn down on quite heavily over this period. So yes, I think that they could perhaps be looked to for some, but I do have reservations about that. I think that we need, the state's putting monies into SMMEs. There's 3 million very small players who are particularly vulnerable. And my strong argument would be that those monies should make their way into hands of small players too. It's got huge developmental implications, positive implications. So yeah, I'm hesitant to looking at resources that are in the informal economy already, where really these people can't pay the bills at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you all the panelists for presentation and responding to the question. As you may see, questions are still coming through, but time is against us. I just want to hand over to MEC to give her closing remarks, but there's one question coming from the fisher folks. They want assurance that their issues will be discussed post this webinar. I just want to hand back to the MEC for closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Dlamini, I'm not the one to make I'm not the host. It's MEC Shomuga who's the host tonight. Just on the fisheries, I saw the question about the fisheries. My understanding of the regulations and the Gazette is that fisheries is one of those sectors that was never closed. It was always part of the agriculture sector that was always open. Of course, it might have suffered as part of some of the value chain industries that were not opened, therefore limiting the fisheries from then doing business. But the fisheries has always been one of those sectors that was always opened. And I saw as well that there was an issue about the fisheries where they are allowed to trade as informal traders. Yes, my understanding is that yes, the fisheries are part of the informal traders. But as I said, I know that our department is also working to ensure that we set up some of the value add facilities for our fishery industry, particularly the informal trading sector of the fisheries, to have the value add centers so that we can maximize that industry, because we do believe that there is a huge potential of having more, create more jobs, but also sustaining that industry if we were to really give more supports and work together. So I'm sure our colleagues from the industry development could still continue discussing and give more information about those value add facilities that we are building to support the fisheries industry. But as I said, that my understanding is that fisheries has always been open as part of the agriculture industry. Yes, partnerships, I totally agree. In fact, when I engaged Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma about the problem that we have been having, for instance, about this issue of the warm food and the delivery or picking up, the one of the argument was that this is an opportunity for informal businesses to drive to go and deliver a food to a lot of people, and instead of people having to rely on drive-throughs, by now we should have had a number of informal traders having started delivering food, because obviously you can see that the deliveries that were there are not coping with the demand. As a result, a number of food delivery establishments are not able to cope. But there is an industry there, there is a business there, opportunity that probably we should have explored. And I was raising with her, particularly within the transport industry sector, and my point about the transport sector and not being able to access the warm food. And she was saying, well, shouldn't you guys be looking at that as an opportunity again, as your silver lining within the informal businesses, to start delivering food to the informal, to your transport, sector? Obviously, as you would all know that food comes with a lot of tape from your food inspectors and all of that, and with the type of informal businesses that we have, as Mama Bapega Introgo and all this nice food. By the time I get with my food to the people in the trucks, Segiabanda or a taxi rank Segiabanda. So yes, I can deliver, but then it will be cold. And I was trying to find a creative way to say, how do we then, okay, fine, we can deliver to the taxi rank, but how do we warm the food? Because it will be cold. Because we don't have portable, warming facilities. So I think the whole issue about ukuthi ama businesses wethu ebesiwenza mhlawumbe this whole issue of repurposing, this whole issue of recalibrating, it still needs to sink into our minds that the way we've been used to doing business needs to change, and it needs to realize that we could still take advantage of the fact that there are new business opportunities that are opened, that we could, I can imagine that some of you would know that there's a lot of women that carry those food warmers that keep food warm for a long time. And I was saying probably those things, if you were to cook food with those and put them in those things, that food will probably stay there warm for a long time. So then it will be easy for you to take the food for delivery. And okay, so that's another business opportunity right there for delivery. So again, it means that somewhere somehow kunaso isidingo sokuthi mhlawumbe kube nendlela esishare ngayo ama ideas amasha wokwenza ibhizinisi ngendlela without complaining and without looking at the issues that stop us from doing things, but with the way of coming up with another creative ways of achieving what we want to achieve without breaking the law, but creatively being able to work within the law. So I do believe that, and I like the point that was made that informal business, when we talk about informal business, it's quite a huge industry. It's not about only vegetables, and all of that. It's within the transport industry. It's within the textile industry. It's within the construction industry, because a number of people, even in big companies, whether it's paper and pulp, whether it's automotive, a number of industries, a big industry rely on informal industries as the part of the value chain support. That is why even now there is a big outcry that you might be having some of the industries that are opened, but without a part of the value chain of those industries opening as well, those industries are stifled. I think it's the same as you would have heard of what KFCs and others who say, well, if I can't, I don't have a drive-through and I don't have any other means of selling, if people can't collect, well, I might as well close. But shouldn't we then be saying, as informal traders, as informal entrepreneurs, surely there's a way that we can find of still making those businesses work and creating new jobs, as Oguti Squaz, Oguti because abantu bayathanda lokhu kudla, but also even okwethu ukudla that we still need to trade ukuthi kufinyelele kubantu. Right now, we're really still battling, for instance, within the transport. That's why I'm making a transport industry, kakhulukazi, even the truck industry, where we're still battling with the warm food challenges. But we're not getting informal businesses coming into that space and providing that food to that industry. Because it could still happen that you would cook at home and deliver the very same way you would have delivered. It doesn't mean just because you cannot have istofu and cook there, you can't cook and deliver. So again, it's about creativity, it's about the leadership, it's about the technology as well, because somebody was asking, what is the role of technology in the informal in the informal trade? There's a lot of technology in the informal trade, because a lot of informal businesses are using even now the informal, the technology. WhatsApp would send a number to say, well, I'm entering Durban and order inhlobo yami, and this and this and that. And then as I send a WhatsApp, you can see from the WhatsApp, you can see the direction, and then you can be able to go and move and deliver that food there where it is needed. And we can do that everywhere in the province, or everywhere for that matter. But zonke lezi zinto zidinga ukuthi thina sonke singomasipala, singuhulumeni, siyisetha, sisupportane to make sure that we really get the economy informal to really kickstart the business part of the economy to get moving. So I like the partnership issue, and I like the role of the technology and innovation, but also the dynamic of the leadership that we want to see emerging from those difficulties and the challenges that we are facing now. And I'm very grateful to all the presenters and the presentations esitholile namhlanje. Ngoba ziyasivuleleka again imqondo yethu ukuthi sikwazi ukuthi sicabange more, and also ama experiences from other African countries asikhulisa kakhulu ukuthi sibone ukuthi kwezinye indawo benza kanjani ukuthi amabhizinisi wabo aqhubeke ahambisane ngendlela umthetho ufuna ukuthi sisebenze ngayo. So okwami nje ngaba ukuncoma njengoba ngisho ukuthi le platform eka MEC Hlomuka, I was just responding to those questions that I saw, and the issue here, your one-stop shop, I was hoping that one of the colleagues, I saw somebody, okay, Nango Usisufikiswa, or somebody else is going to come in now. Also pendula ngokuthi khona umbuzo ukuthi abantu outside of Durban, how can they access usizo? Ikhona impendulo ethi ama offices waka Edtea kuma district offices akhona wonke avulelekile ukunikeza the support and the help to all the informal businesses that need support. So you don't need to be in Durban to get support as informal traders. That our district offices are out there to give that kind of support. Our colleagues will be able, through also our website, you can get the addresses to our district offices to get that support that you need. The colleagues will answer about the one-stop shop. We have actually improved the one-stop shop working. Initially, it wasn't coping with the numbers, but now it is coping. There was another question that was saying the support that is given by the consultant it is free. A support that is given there, whether it's legal support, whether it's financial support, whether it's mentorship, whether it's financial, any support that you need as a business, it's free of charge. You don't pay a cent, including to fill the form. And I'm glad that the presenters raised the point about working with the organizations, because that is what we're trying to find solutions. Since the informal sector is structured the way it is structured, how do we find a way of giving support without falling foul of the Auditor General and the audit queries? Because as you know, that with the public funds and with the public account, there's a lot of stringent accountability measures that must go with that. We need to ensure that there is no corruption. We need to ensure accountability. So that is why sometimes you might find that there's a red tape, but it's also aimed at ensuring that there is measures of control more than just being punitive. And I saw the question about the waste pickers, as well. We have asked our environment department to support our waste pickers, because they are very vulnerable at this time as well, because as well as the landfill pickers, because of the COVID-19 and with the disposals of hazardous materials, and the waste pickers who might come across material that might be contaminated or that might expose them. So we have asked our environment section to look at how should we mitigate that risk to the waste pickers as well as the landfill site, and the compliance under the landfill, particularly the waste landfill. But I'm sure the colleagues will be able to respond to other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donisha. I just want to break the protocol and give the chance now to Figiso and Barbara.
If I could come in, please, it's Neville Mikey, CEO, Trade Investment, KwaZulu-Natal.
The one-stop shop, yes. There is a one-stop shop, Mr. Dlamini.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Right. Okay, just to indicate that as MEC has indicated, for the one-stop shop, we do have the facility available, and my colleague is also on the line, and he also pendula isiZulu, because mina isiZulu sami siyahlupa kancane. So I'll just say it in English, and then Unkanyiso will come in. We've got a one-stop shop to assist in terms of accessing some of the facilities that have been offered by government. The telephone number for the one-stop shop is 031-368-9602. There's a team on the ground that handles all the calls that come through to our facility, and then we're able to respond and assist a lot of the informal traders that are wanting to have access and to also wanting to get information on all the facilities that are available for them to be supported. I'll just ask Nkanyiso to come in, and then uzokhuluma ngesiZulu.
Thank you. Please do that. Nkanyiso.
Thanks so much, Neville. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. No, njengoba esechazile uNeville weDlamini lukhona usizo at TIKZN One Stop Shop. So si coordinator wonke lama funding applications la we COVID-19. So uyakwazi ukuthi usithole kule number ade sayibizile uNeville 031 368 9602. Kanti sinane email address which is specific also. It is business.support@tikzn.co.za. That is business.support@tikzn.co.za. Siyakwazi ukuthi sinike i-business advice and also si package ama i-application yakho ukuze mayifika phambili ifike lento abayifunayo. Mawukuthi khona la ushoda khona i-business plan yakho ayihlangene kahle, your financials mhlawumbe nakhona awakahlangani kahle, siyakwazi ukuthi siwabuke and then sik-advise sikulungisele nakhona sidlulise i-application yakho phambili nje siyiphelele silento abayifuna kuyona, so kuzoba easy ukuthi nawe ukwazi ukuthi u-approve.
I just want to give this opportunity again. I promise to give it to Barbara. I know we have gone after 5, but it doesn't kill to give anyone a chance. Barbara, are you there?
Thank you, Mr. Dlamini. Protocol normally doesn't allow us to speak after the MEC has closed. In her remarks, she did indicate in terms of the way forward. But what is clear from all these discussions is that we still have a long way to go, and we need to come up with quick wins that we can implement while on level 4 lockdown and move on to the other levels. So as a team, we need to start working on that to ensure we've got interventions per level and the quick wins that are expected from to support the informal sector. We have noted the concerns, especially from the fish folks, and also the issue of permits. There is an issue that wasn't really raised, but we need to ensure municipalities support on that in terms of the issue of stock, money for stock by the spaza shops. We've got the bulk buying program from Edtea that the MEC will be talking about in the near future. So that would also be one way of assisting the spaza shop owners to get stock in the immediate phase. So from my side as Cox, I think those are the only issues that I wanted to raise that I thought were not clearly covered in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I was watching that again. That protocol really doesn't allow. And yeah, in time, again, looking at time, we've gone over. But thanks very much for. I'll take this one as closing comments to thank every participant, our presenters, Nomshoni Shobe Kona, MEC, and to round off the discussion, hoping that there will be further discussion in the very near future and actions will be taken. Can I take this opportunity to thank every participant again for going with me. It's not a very comfortable way of managing meetings, but we'll get used to it. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Siyabonga, Baba Dlamini, Siyabonga kakhulu. Siyafisa ukuxolisela umhlonishwa uShomuka. He was coming in, abuye aphume, I think the signal ibimhlupha kakhulu. Siyafisa ukuxolisa on his behalf for today's session. Siyabonga kakhulu kubona bonke ama presenters and yourself. Siyabonga.
Thank
you, Mr. Dlamini. That was really great.
Sibonga Dlamini. Thank you so much.